My name's Andy Wild. I'm based out of here in Manchester, so I'm a local lad, you can probably tell from the accent. And I'm going to be talking about metadata, unfortunately. And we're going to talk particularly about production metadata and how it's used, or maybe even how it's not used, or maybe how you think you would like to use it, but then find that you can't use it. So let's kind of start with the core fundamentals of metadata, and let's look at what Wikipedia says about it. It's usually this first point of contact for everybody. What does Wiki say metadata is? Well, they kind of say that metadata is ambiguous, and it is. It's very ambiguous. Metadata spans not just production in our own little universe of either shooting video or producing any metadata from asset management systems or MAMs or PAMs, but it kind of spreads into the world of the internet. It spreads into the world of anything you can think of. If it goes to a computer, it will have metadata associated with it in some way, shape or form. So the common phrase is data about data as well, which again is also very ambiguous. Well, what do I mean, data about data? It's a little bit strange, but we'll kind of hopefully kind of go into more detail what that really means. But what we're really concerned about here is descriptive metadata with regards to production assets, i.e. when you go and shoot with your Canon 5D or Canon 305, whatever camera you want to use, how is your metadata being used, and are you using it efficiently? If at all, to be honest. Who's been around any of the stands here today and heard people talking about metadata? I think everybody has. You know, oh yeah, for example, the Blackmagic camera, which is a amazing box of tricks, but they do talk quite a lot about how I can put metadata in any camera you want. You know, the 305, the Canon, you can embed metadata. Some metadata's put inside the actual essence without even asking it to do it. Okay, so we need to see how this can be kind of used, how you can maybe access it, how you can use it, and maybe how that can actually enrich your content, or more importantly, streamline your production, I suppose. So at the bottom there, I just put a single tagline that says, video metadata created at the point of capture, as well as through MAMs and PAMs. And that's what we're going to be talking about in essence, the camera acquisition, and then how you enrich that metadata with the actual essences themselves. So, what are we talking about? Well, I've kind of been through that already. We're talking about the actual acquisition of material, embedding metadata into it. Prior to having file-based cameras, and let's face it, metadata has only come about recently because we are now acquiring in a file-based world. Prior to that, when we shot with tapes, so digibetas, beta SPs, those were old enough to remember things like U-matic, Graham in the corner, or 1-inch tapes, we always had time code associated with it, didn't we? That was our way of finding a clip. Okay, my tape was an hour long. I shot a wide shot of the skyline of Manchester. It was round about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and we used time code to find it. Okay, and that was our first universal metadata description. We could find things, and that's what metadata should be. It should enable you to find clips or use those clips in an alternative manner. Okay? With the arrival of the file-based workflow, that's also given us a second problem. Oh, well, there's lots of problems, to be honest, maybe 10 problems we've got. But one of the biggest concerns we've got about metadata is how do we access it, how do we know where we're putting it, and also how do we then use it? Everybody had a pad and pen and a time code, and when somebody went on location and they shot something, they would say, at time code X, it was a great shot. At time code Y, they mumbled their lines. Okay? Unfortunately, production has now been streamlined as well, hasn't it? Okay, which means for a lot of people, that's a loss of jobs and skill sets. One person doesn't do one thing, they probably do 10. So it may well be that the guy who's shooting with the camera sets the camera up, loads all the metadata descriptions into it possibly, or not, which is 9 times out of 10 the case. And then it also may well be that somebody wants to annotate the shots with ideally a little pad that would say good shot, bad shot, whatever it needs to be. I did notice as well on one of the stands they were saying, oh yeah, when you shoot with this camera it's great because we can embed the metadata into it, and then it showed you a keyboard. And in my head alarm bells starts to ring because that means that I still have to manually go through and put data in, and that's not the way technology should really help me. That's going back to the old-fashioned days of writing things down on pen and paper and sticking a sheet inside a digibeta box, isn't it? So, as I said before, tape kind of fits into that first paragraph description, and metadata goes into the bottom. Lots of cameras do metadata integration, so they capture this metadata that describes your shot and embeds it inside the essence. So you hear that quite a lot from people, oh, we embed it in the essence itself. What I mean by that is that when you actually shoot something and produce an MXF file, the metadata, so the descriptive information that is created by the camera, goes actually into the file itself. Okay, it's baked into. They can't be necessarily separated from each other. You can read the content and maybe store it separately, but actually the essence itself contains core metadata, which is at the point of capture, so i.e. what the camera embeds inside it. So I put down things there, it'll tell you what codec it's used, obviously. It may well put in GPS locations. Where in the world were you when you shot this particular item? Who here has ever used GPS position from their metadata? Okay, yes, Sado Graham, and the gentleman at the front as well. What did you use it for? It's holiday snaps. All right, fantastic. So that's great. It works fantastic for your holiday snaps. So if ever you got Alzheimer's and you forgot where you were, you could use a GPS and type in your computer, which is great. Okay, there is no necessary use about knowing where you are on the face of the planet, unless you are the likes of the BBC, say, for example, who are going to track the migratory herd of who knows what across the northern plains, and they want to know where it is. I don't think even the BBC would kind of go to those lengths to really concern themselves about GPS data. They are an awful lot of engineering play toys that go into metadata in cameras. Okay, somebody's gone, do you know what would be really great if we put GPS locators onto our metadata? Nobody here in this room has probably asked them to do that. It's just a kind of an engineering byproduct that's actually happened. So that's one of the things we need to be aware of. There's an awful lot of toys and whistles and bells that go inside metadata creation that may not be actually useful to you in a production. So that's what I'm describing here, aren't I? I'm describing acquisition metadata. A camera shoots something, usually in an MPEG format pretty much nowadays, and inside that essence, that file, is your metadata, which I've done with a little post-it note, okay, which is kind of the thing that enriches your content. Now, that's great if you knew what you were doing. A lot of these cameras can actually have functionality where you can say, I want to put this explicit metadata into my shot. A lot of people either don't know how to set their cameras up to embed the metadata into it, or worse than that, they're just too busy and can't get around to doing this as well. Okay? So there's kind of these two issues with the whole thing. So realistically, most productions are concerned, did you manage to get that? And does it look okay? Yes, I don't care, let's move on. From that step, most people, and I mean this in a kind of a small production environment, their next step will be to take that material into an edit suite in some way, shape or form, I would have thought. From that particular shot, they can then extend the functionality of their metadata. Now, what will happen there is they will embed extra clip information, for want of a better description, inside their NLE suite. So be it Avid, be it FCP, be it Adobe, be it whatever you want to use, they can actually increase the actual metadata description of those shots. Unfortunately, a lot of the times that metadata is then stuck inside your nonlinear suite. Okay, you can't necessarily pick up the clip that you've described and move it to somebody else and say, I'll put something in that for you. Well, you did, but you put it in on an Avid and you need to be exported. So this kind of issue of genealogy, of actually putting metadata to a clip and then maintaining that genealogy and enriched data between various manufacturers and various nonlinear suites, is an additional issue that needs to kind of be addressed as well. I've put a little file down here at the bottom that says XML. This is pretty much the standard format that is used, which in effect is a text description, as it were. This is used to move metadata between various components, be that between asset management systems or PAM systems or nonlinear suites. XML is kind of the king of moving stuff, for want of a better description, from A to B. Could be metadata, it could be anything. It could be the visual description of an edit or something like that. So that's the first concern, is this XML data. And we now are stuck, because if I've actually further described my clip on the right-hand side inside a nonlinear suite and embedded descriptions, maybe someone's actually gone and done an annotation, of actually written down verbally what is said on that particular clip, or described it as Andy has an interview and stands in front of 20 people, and there's lots more data to that. That has to be shipped separately to the essence. So I've now got these two files. I've got the essence itself, which has some metadata in it, and then I've got data that I feel has been added to that important, but they're not actually together, they're not baked in. And that becomes another kind of point in question of, well, it's okay so long as I move within the same system, But as soon as I step outside of my nonlinear suite or my particular asset management system, that metadata may not be transparent to everybody else, or might have to go through a conversion process that then loses metadata. So again, it's not as slick as we would like it to be. Sorry. So we've got, I've just kind of done a slightly different thing here. These are PAMs and MAM systems, so asset management systems here. This is probably the place where most people perceive metadata to be of the most importance. Okay, there was an earlier lecture from a lady. I believe she's got one of the VisRT, the RDOME systems here. And one of the things she was talking about was how they use their asset management system, okay? And it is very bespoke to them. So if they have, for example, say, archive solutions that is based around news, they will log things in a predetermined order and in a very specific way. And she was talking about things like Obama, you know, and on their system, when they wanted to find Obama, there was about 10 different spellings of it because that was a limitation of how the asset management system works. How do you spell it? How do you describe him? The president, the current president, the 44th president. There was lots of variations to this. And unfortunately, we'd all love a kind of a Google equivalent just to type something in, and it would give you suggestions, or better than that, some thought process where we just know what you're thinking about and be able to find it for you. Okay? Because the other thing we need to be very aware about metadata, and I'll come to it a little bit later on, is actually what is important to you as an individual user, and we'll come to that in just a second. So we've talked about, or I've waffled a lot about metadata and where it's used, acquisition, nonlinear suites, we can enrich that metadata of a clip, or asset management systems. And again, we'll come back to asset management system in a bit more detail later on. But who decides where all this metadata goes? Who actually tells me that I should be using this metadata? Who tells me I should be using a metadata schema? Whatever that means, okay? Well, that's usually controlled by the EBU. Now, anybody here been on the EBU site? I'm sure there's a few people. I recognize a few faces that go onto EBU sites. It's a very dull engineering, techie kind of thing. I found lots of white papers that are specific to the metadata. I've chosen one here which trips off the tongue, EBU Tech 3349. Now that is the core metadata set. That is allegedly a document that describes the core requirements and the core schemas that make it up. I've just taken a little screen grab there, it's probably quite small to see it, but it kind of tells me, you know, the camera data, the little bar on the right-hand side, little pink one on the top right-hand side says, you know, it says camera unit metadata, then underneath that you've then got lens unit metadata, you've then got that microphone metadata. Who uses microphone metadata here? Nobody. Guarantee it, okay? So a lot of these technical documents are all great, and they're engineering interpretations of metadata. They are not real end users' requirements of metadata, or what you think metadata is. Unfortunately, we are dictated by a lot of these technical documents, because this has come about through this amazing thing called MXF, this media exchange format, which has allowed us to have these file-based acquired cameras and a horrendous amount of codecs and a lot of probably pain in everybody's life to get data from A to B. So I've set down here, so well, these are great. Somebody's actually set these technical descriptions out, but what does it really mean to you? And the answer is, from a technical point of view, nothing, okay? This should be a technical description that goes out to manufacturers who should be creating tool sets to make your life easier to find shots, to enrich shots, and manipulate that metadata seamlessly so it can create either a new revenue stream for you. So if you're creating maybe a generic shot and you want to have that sold through the internet through like a stock shot company, you want to be able to kind of push that seamlessly to them and actually enable the world to find your shot and pay you £100 for every time it's used. Okay, so they're the kind of the real world requirements that you would want as a production company. But actually, we're kind of stuck with these engineering descriptions, and hopefully someone will take these engineering descriptions and then interpret them into a usable skill or a usable tool set for you to use as an end user. So, well, I've waffled on, like I say, about metadata description and how it's created, but what I want to do is the key fun thing is, how do we use metadata? And my first line there, it says, badly and personally, okay? Every time you actually put metadata in to describe a shot, it is your own personal interpretation of a shot that you write down. You write what is important to you, and you don't write information down explicitly that is important to somebody else or from their point of view. Okay? If I had a wide shot, and we'll come to that in just a second, if I had a wide shot and I put some information onto it, it may well be that it is just for me, but if somebody else comes and looks at that shot, they will interpret that completely differently, and it means we'll end up with two different sets of metadata. And we'll come back to that in just a second. So, the other point as well is metadata is specific in time. So what is important to you right now may not be important to you in a year from now, or 2 years from now, or even next week. Okay? And we'll come back to that in just a minute. So who currently now are deemed as masters of metadata? Well, these are the archivists. Okay? The people who are using metadata in the true everyday sense and want to use metadata to find, locate, and utilize shots are archivists. Okay? So let's take an example. If you were ITV, or ITN News, should we say, who has a vast back catalogue of material that lives on tapes, and you want to find a shot of, I don't know, the election of the last Prime Minister or something like that in 1927, if you've got that, hopefully, you want to be able to go to a search engine, type in a loose description, and hopefully receive some information back that is pertinent to you. Unfortunately, a lot of those times, the information you type in is only as good as what is stored against a particular shot. And what is stored against a particular shot is usually based around what individual users put in. So also known as carbon error input. We get most people kind of sit there typing away. If they spell things badly, it doesn't always kind of go through. But more importantly is what's their interpretation of that shot that they're looking at. They usually type it into certain dictated fields. So it may be part of a group. Group could be parliamentary. There could be a subgroup inside there which goes around looking at prime ministers. It may well be a date and time field. There's lots of specifics and lots of variables. And archivists have done this for a long time. So they have actually built schemas. They've probably gone hand in hand with developers. There's a guy here from Synergy. They do a lot of work like this as well. So they can actually kind of find data and things like that. One of their roles is actually to make sure that what you're typing in is appropriate so you can get it back as well. So a lot of the manufacturers kind of guide you through that process. And a lot of the archivist software is quite bespoke and can be quite expensive. So that's a kind of another boundary to us on a traditional production point of view, is that there is a value, or there is an expenditure that has to be made in order to actually to enrich your shots or your files by enriching them with metadata. There's a cost that then is difficult to recuperate as well, and that's the other thing we need to kind of look at. So I've got a shot here. It says, what's your metadata? This is a still shot, or one of mine. So what I'd like, just to kind of, as an experiment, just to say, I've got some very personal views on this because I was there when I took the picture. I took the picture, so that's obviously why there's a personal view in it. But from other people's point of view, just out of curiosity, what would be, anybody want to shout what they see there? How would you describe, for metadata, if I was writing something down to describe that shot, what would I put down? Mountains. So somebody started out mountains. So obvious things, there's a mountains. Okay. Well, that's agreed. Mountains. I'm actually quite specific. It's a mountain range that happens to be in the Himalayas. It's actually the Parilacha mountain range. So I would kind of describe that as the Parilacha mountain range. Okay. We went there to climb a route. So the other thing I would also put inside here is we went to climb the little gully on the left-hand side, which we didn't do. So it's now an unclimbed mountain. Okay. We didn't complete that. So we moved over to another area, and there's a little ridge line that goes on here, and that's called Snotty's Gully, and we climbed that instead. Okay? That's also my mate who stands at the front there. So there's the actual climber. He's also called Andy as well. And then inside that as well, he's a professional climber. He earns his living doing this as opposed to standing here and talking to people like I have to. He earns his living as a climber, so he actually has a sponsor. So there's a brand associated with him as well. Okay, and if anybody ever went along Deansgate, you'd see this shot on the mountain equipment side of their building there, because that's who he's sponsored by. Brand, plug, etc. But that is a very personal view of what that shot is to me. Everybody in this room will have a very different description of that. Okay, and that metadata I am placing against that particular shot is only relevant now. Okay, because it may well be that next year or the year after, somebody will go and climb that unclimbed ridge that we only got 3/4 of the way up and have to retreat off. Somebody may well actually climb that, and they will name it. So then all of a sudden that becomes irrelevant, doesn't it? Okay, my description of that isn't true for what I'm looking for. They could call that Andy's unclimbed gully, or Fred's gully, what they want to call it, but I would never be able to find it because it's now not unclimbed. It is. So the point is, all your material is dynamic. Whether you've shot it last week or last year, the content of it varies upon the current state and time. So, why should we use metadata? Well, in theory, from my point of view, it should help your production. It should streamline it. It should make sure that you can find shots and use them appropriately. It should also be able to help you lever that footage for use elsewhere. So maybe you want to use it as stock footage, shout out to the world, get a revenue stream from it, something like that. There are things that enable you to do that. So this is just an example of that, and we'll come back to it in just a second. But this is a Thought Equity. This is a website where you can actually go to and you can actually purchase stock footage off the internet. Okay, this has been embedded inside. Anybody use Avid here in version 6? They've got a thing called their marketplace, and that links you straight through to here. You can purchase stock footage directly inside the application, this type of thing. But actually, wouldn't it be much better to go the other way around? Wouldn't it be better for you to go and shoot something if you're actually in the role or production of actually picking up your camera and pointing at something? Wouldn't it be better to have your assets realized twice? Once in the production that you're using now, and also as a generic stock shot. Maybe you've got a fantastic shot of a dog chasing a car down the road or whatever it needs to be. But the point is, maybe that shot's got another value which you don't realize right now, which means that you have a third party who can actually put metadata against it so people can find it through that web interface. And that leads me on to this bit, metadata tools. This first paragraph I put up here is a quote from EBU from 2009. And one of the problems I'd like to tell you, to discuss here, because this talk originally was going to be quite technical, but when I actually went and talked to different vendors, different manufacturers, I then realized that the biggest problem was that everybody hears about metadata, but nobody's actually using metadata in the way it was ever envisaged to be used. And fundamentally, the key problem with that is that there is not the right tool set out there for you as end users to manipulate that metadata or extract relevant information from the metadata, or constantly combing shots for additional metadata. And I'll ratify that a little bit later on. But this was from 2009 from the EBU, 10 points you need to know about metadata. And one of them says, generating rich metadata is expensive and time-consuming. To address this issue, EBU Technical has issued a call for technologies on tools for automatic generation of metadata, speech recognition, segmentation, shot detection, copy, repletion detection, content summarization. So basically, they want a lot of automated tools or technologies that can actually look at images dynamically, so image analysis, because we always want to refresh the content or the metadata over our content. Like I say, if I've got a wide shot, as I had before, of the Parilapture, and that becomes climbed, I want to be able to crawl back over that data and refine my metadata constantly, but not manually. I don't have to go and find the shot to then re-enter information about it to say, well, actually, that unclimbed gully is now called Fred's Gully. Okay, we want an automated tool that can do that on our behalf. And unfortunately, that will be there's no get away from it. It will be an expensive tool. So if that was a web-based service where you could submit your files and they were constantly crawled for you, then that would be great. But I'm not aware, and if anybody else is aware of that technology, please let me know. I'm not aware that any of that is easily and commercially available to anybody right now. But this is a request from the EBU maybe nearly 5 years ago, and I've not heard anything on that right now particularly. And again, it's just purely because it's going to be very, very expensive to do. So in the meantime, while we're waiting for this technology, we're kind of have to kind of get on with the job ourselves a little bit. So in the meantime, people will have to invest in systems to help facilitate their own use of metadata. So I've kind of taken on two views of this. Rather than you having, say, for example, a nonlinear suite to kind of track your assets, you need some form of MAM, a media asset manager in some way, shape or form. Everybody here, I presume, has heard of CatDV? No? Okay. CatDV, some people probably have, some people haven't. CatDV is kind of like a personal MAM system. It is very good and is very cheap. Okay, if you do a search for CapDV on the internet, you can literally buy a personal version. So if if I did all my assets here on my laptop or on a network drive, excuse me, I can use CatDV to actually look at the information, view the files actually directly, add extra metadata into them, catalog them, and kind of make sure that my assets are much more easily available to me. Now that works fine if you're a one-man production crew or you hold everything in one location. And again, this thing literally starts at something like £80 for an individual license and kind of scales up from there. But realistically, that's where people would actually have to start if you've got your own personal productions. You want some kind of MAM system that would go on top of it. This is kind of the starting point. There are, as I mentioned before, the Synergy. There's obviously the VizRT guys. Unfortunately, 9 times out of 10, the question you will have to ask yourself is, how deep is my pocket? And my pocket isn't very deep, okay? So I kind of would say start with CapDV, look at the base level entries you can do, and kind of go up from there. It may well be that your nonlinear suite is fine for you. If everything passes through your one nonlinear suite, keep it there. But actually, can you afford to keep everything you've ever shot on your nonlinear suite? And I bet my bottom dollar the answer is no, because now you have file-based cameras. If you see it moving, you will shoot it and produce a 600-to-1 shoot ratio, because anything that moves might be worthwhile saving, okay? And unfortunately, that has been a byproduct again of our file-based workflows and file-based acquiring cameras. A good example, however, shall we say, of what you could do if you had a really deep pocket and somebody like the BBC behind you, is how metadata can actually enhance things for end users. And a great example is the Olympics and the BBC's metadata. This has come purely from the internet, and I put the address underneath there, bbc.co, blogs, BBC internal, 2012, 08, blah, blah, blah. But it tells you in detail of how they took all their metadata, embedded it in with content, and then streamed it either on the internet or the Red Button service, or just out to Freeview services, satellite services, and it kind of takes the whole idea of what was needed to do that. It's a really long read. It's a very interesting read, and it also kind of comes back to the fact that this was a bespoke system. They made this, because obviously it wasn't really around anywhere else before. They actually got coders themselves and they wrote it. And the diagram on the right-hand side here is how they got, it says Olympic Broadcasting Services, Delta Tray, with the people who are supplying all the statistical data about either particular players. So they had a different stream coming in from Delta Tray. They'd have to strip that asset out. It's all XML schemas. They then put that into the Olympics feed as well, so the different Olympic feeds that come in. How they then kind of push all that information together. So we've actually got their work in progress stores as well on the left-hand side, things like this. It's a fascinating read. And if you've got deep pockets and you've got the resources, it is an amazing way and a great way for you to realize different revenue streams as well, because the problem we've all got now is we are utilizing our productions in more than one way. It's not just going to where on the television. It might be an on-demand service. It could be a web streaming service. And metadata has different requirements in each of those fields. Okay, if you're streaming something on the internet, you might be able to embed a web link. If you saw something of interest and you clicked on the image, it may well be you could call a web page up to actually view something that was of interest to you at that time. But you obviously can't do that necessarily right now with a traditional Freeview television. Okay, so some things has metadata that is delivery specific, and that is embedding metadata post-production. It may have to go through a completely separate process to embed the relevant metadata again. Okay, so again, it's just an example of what could be done or what has been done with metadata and how that has actually helped to enrich the content to the end users. Who here, actually, just out of curiosity, who here watched the Olympics? Traditionally, they would have watched it on the television. Who watched it here on their PC? Yeah, I mean, I was kind of one of those. I watched quite a lot of it on the PC, purely because I had to work, so I was sneaking looks on the internet, like you do. Ooh, wash my mouth out. But everybody does that, that's kind of, it's great. But the other great thing about it was I could pause it, I could start it again, I could tell the boss, I was just, this type of thing. So it's interesting, there's a separate page on the BBC website as well, which tells you and looks at the take-up of the actual delivery format, whether it was a traditional transmission or maybe it was actually more IP stream based around, the internet delivery, or even a mobile phone, looking on your iPhone or your Android phone, anything like that. So, metadata's future. I'm trying to keep this relatively shortish, as short as I possibly can. I kind of feel that there are probably 5 key areas that need to be addressed. Cross-platform standardization of metadata. One of the problems we've all got at the moment with file-based cameras is that while there is an agreed MXF standard, you can do what the hell you want within that standard, which means that the likes of Sony and Canon and JVC may well produce cameras that give stunning pictures, but they all have their own interpretation of where that is stored in the MXF description or schema, okay? And we've got exactly the same problem with metadata, okay? We can put as much metadata in clips as we possibly want, but there's not necessarily any agreed standard tool for how to strip that metadata out, use it, manipulate it, or actually manage or manipulate the metadata actually inside the essence as well in the media itself, okay? So that's the first thing I would say. There needs to kind of some agreed standardization on the use of metadata and how we use it and manipulate it. Second one is, say, appropriate metadata creation in camera and production tools. So what I mean by that is that we need to make things a bit more usable, for want of a better description. No messing around with tiny little buttons on the side of your camera to make sure that you put the right metadata in and, oh, I put it as an A and it should have been an E and I meant to put choose and I put the wrong data. We need something that is much more easy to set up, maybe a predefined template that can be easily pushed through either an Android phone or something like that. But the point is we need something that takes away the hassle of messing around with the camera to embed the right metadata. It's easy to pick up the wrong, big production companies, you could pick up the wrong camera and start shooting with the wrong metadata on it completely. So the metadata therefore is useless, okay? It's not even in the context of what you use. So again, we need to have something that is much easier, something that can be used in conjunction of the actual acquisition of the material. Maybe something like a remote Palm system that is easy enough to kind of log additional metadata into the essence as you're going along, or something that can actually retrospectively put something inside an essence at the point of acquisition as well would be something that would be quite useful. Okay, metadata I feel quite at the moment is a big tick box in a lot of manufacturers' handbook. They go down, we've made a camera, can it have metadata in it? Yes, tick. They don't really care what goes in. They don't care about the kind of the use of that. And I think that's something that a lot of the manufacturers need to kind of address quite quickly. Increase open toolset for metadata manipulation and reading. There are very few, if any, free metadata tools out there. If you buy yourself a Sony camera, it may well be that you have access to the free Sony software that enables you to look at that material, but there's no vanilla flavor bit of code that can really go and read anything. Nobody's agreed upon an open standard that says, you know what, download this, it's open source code, or have this, it's literally £50, and you can do all of this extra functionality on your metadata or help you manage your metadata. Because the other thing as well is, excuse me, I'm sure you'll have footage that you'll want to fit back inside your, if you have a production that's run for, or you've been running productions for 5 or 6 years, when you first started using file-based cameras, you probably didn't know what you were doing, you learned as you went along, and now you've come up with a great scheme for how your metadata should work. Wouldn't it be great to go back and revisit all your original files and actually remanipulate them to fit within your current scheme of how you wanted it to work, rather than have to go back and say, oh, well, that was shot 2 years ago, so I wouldn't have put that information in. You're lucky if I shot the time of day on the time code, that type of thing. So again, we need to get an understanding and an agreed open tool set that people can produce and enable us to kind of manipulate metadata. Improved dynamic tools for metadata crawling, I put here, i.e. constant coming of files to generate more accurate metadata depending upon users' requests. So again, the idea that you either submit assets to somebody else or you purchase a system that constantly combs over your actual source material and actually sees if you put a thing saying, have you got a shot of a climber who's trying the north face of the Eiger or something like that? If it could work over these shots and dynamically analyze the image, which again, very much like Blade Runner, but if you could analyze the actual moving footage itself, that'd be a much more effective way of generating metadata, because it is of the shot doesn't need to have the metadata with it. You can constantly comb it based upon the actual content of the shot itself or the speech that goes with it. There's already speech software out there that works. There are things like, for example, if you there is on Avid Nonlinear Suites, you can actually run an analysis software that goes through all what they speak. You can load a script in, and you can actually find multiple takes of that shot relevant to the script. So it will find you the shot where the actor actually says something for you. And this is, £300-400 to purchase. It's not particularly expensive. Is that me? So yeah, the actual facilities are out there. It's just making sure that they become much more open source, much more usable, and are used in a much more appropriate manner for you as an end user, or for you as an end user, should I say. Finally here, education in the use of metadata for specific audiences, internet, mobile, etc. So what I mean by that is that metadata creation at the point of ingest or production is not the end of the process. Unfortunately, so I was speaking to Ian over here a little bit earlier on, and he was saying, well, I need to deliver in a file-based format as an end user, and we want specific metadata in there. And again, that metadata he has to deliver is not necessarily part and parcel of his actual assets metadata, okay? So there's lots of things we need to be aware of. There's lots of things we need to kind of address. But unfortunately, unless we can actually get the ears of the manufacturers, that's what we're going to have to kind of look at. So, in summary, metadata is becoming useful, and we do need to stick with it. Yes, we do. We've kind of been through that before. It's very important we stick with it because it's here. Cameras offer it to us. We just need to use it in a more efficient manner. Metadata generation at the point of creation needs to be enriched and simplified. Again, just kind of going what we said before. Simple, affordable tools to manage production metadata need to be established within agreed standards. And again, we don't need to have it's in the MXF standard. We need a much more tight definition of what these standards actually are. Automated metadata creation. Again, what I said before, combing of metadata or combing of shots to create metadata for you. Some kind of Google functionality. And we know, to be honest, let's go back to that. We know that typing things in phonetically into something doesn't necessarily work for us when we're talking about a moving image, because one single shot could have 4 different contents in it because the camera pans and moves around. So again, that doesn't always help us. Finally, consumers need to be able to voice their metadata needs to the manufacturers. It's really important that you end users tell manufacturers what I want to do with metadata, because unless you tell them, they will just keep on going down the same track for you and just saying, well, this is what we interpret, how you would use it. And that isn't necessarily the case. So that's my kind of final summary. What I'd like to finish with, though, is maybe just some, anybody, any questions, and maybe I can field those answers to you. Or if you've not got, call me afterwards. I'll be around for the next kind of 10 or 15 minutes or so. But is there any questions you've got? Brilliant. Let's go to the pub. Okay. Thank you very much. Cheers. Thanks. Thank you.